Hello, welcome to the self-learning platform by Dr. Sushma Singh. Today we start Unit 3, Nature of Indian Diversities and Nationalist Response. And our topic is Religious Diversity versus Communalism. The Indian nationalists had to contend with diversity and differences within religion as well as between religions within the Indian context. Most nationalists, whether they were Hindu revivalists like Tilak or liberals like Nehru, explicitly rejected the idea of the majoritarian rule based on one religion or language. On the surface, they eschewed thinking of the nation in terms of a single religious identity. At a general level, religious diversity in itself was not a problem. In fact, it was cherished as a unique manifestation of Indian, more specifically Hindu toleration. But communalism, that is a narrow group mentally being itself on a religious community, but in reality concerned with political power and patronage of the interested group, was a problem fueled by the divide and rule policy of the British. But then few nationalists managed to transcend communal thinking and preserve diversity with and between religions. Hindu revivalists such as Tilak considered diversity within Hinduism as inhabiting Hindu unity to some extent. Sectarian prejudices were seen as weakening the Hindu community. He saw history largely as a struggle between different religious communities. In the past, he claimed Buddhists attacked Hinduism. In the future, he foresaw Christianity challenging Hinduism. Against this threat, Hindu community had to fortify itself. The way in which Tilak looked at the past was to some extent conditioned by his hopes for the future. He did not ask whether battle lines were drawn in the past in the same manner as they were in the present, that is, in terms of religious identities and communal loyalties. Further, Tilak's vision of future, where he saw the Hindu united into a strong community, also had to be examined. To what extent is such a vision friendly to the diversity within Hinduism? Most nationalists, be it Tilak or Radhakrishnan, approached Hinduism through selective metaphysical idea of Advaita and neglected the rich, large diversity of practice. To some extent, they resorted to some key texts like Gita and Upanishads and attempted to streamline the diversity of Hindu along the line of Semitic religions. That is, one text, one god of perhaps one organization or church. In turn, this leads to a denial of conflicting theologies within Hinduism that contributed to its strength at different historical junctures. Further, the attempt to introduce Ganesh and Shivaji festivals to mobilize the Hindus into a community opened up the dangerous possibility of political use of religion of majoritarian ends. His opposition to the age of consent bill, which sought to raise the marriageable age of for girls from 10 to 12, also lent weight to Orthodox Hindus. Although Tilak himself was not personally against the Muslims and commanded many admirers among them, he inaugurated a style of politics that contained the seeds of an aggressive Hindu nationalism. Even during his time, Savdeshi often got mixed up with Hindu religiosity, although there were dissenters. Rabindranath Tagore entry and exit from Savdeshi was probably the most eloquent expression of both the attractiveness and anxiety induced by such a heady combination of radical politics of religiosity. In contrast, Gandhi forged a nationalist response that was relatively more inclusive and less aggressive vis-a-vis other religions. Besides the Gita, he appealed to other sources such as Sermon on the Mount, Jain idea of ahimsa, and Vaishnavist bhakti. Gandhi continued to conceive of the Indian national based on Hindu ideals such as Swaraj or Ram Rajya, but through the ideal of non-violent action. He hoped to temper the assertive impulse from turning into aggressive Hindu nationalism. His vision of Hindu community did not require new temples on disputed sites. Although he would have reminded Hindu that mythic sites are not to be confused with specific locus. Bhakti theology claims that ultimately these spaces are to be found in the heart. Gandhi was probably not only one devotee to have said that Gita and Karan are two eyes. As Ashish Nandi puts it, Gandhi forged a religious tolerance which was perhaps more suited to the Indian side. He was open to others in and through his active religious practices. This openness was not acceptable to fanatical Hindus. A third ideological response to religious diversity came from liberal secular persons such as Nehru. For Nehru, Muslims were not a community opposed to the Hindu community. He saw them as equally divided by class, language, and ideologies. Similarly, he did not see the Hindus as a homogeneous community. As noted above, he was more concerned about this kind of thinking leading to conflict. Nehru grasped that people could believe in different gods and books, but he was apprehensive of the political passions generated by faith. But then Gandhi realized that in modern times politics is everywhere, and so religion gets politicized. The problem is not to shield any realms from politics, but how to train people so that they respect democratic norms and are forced to respect rule of law while using religious ideologies and symbols for their own interest. Now, these ideological responses were shaped by different political circumstances and movements on the ground. Were Hindu and Muslim really divided into clear cut communities as Tilak encouraged us to think? Or were they really living in perfect amity until the British came to divide and rule? As Sumit Sarkar points out, the development of communal and national consciousness are both modern phenomena in that they were facilitated by modern economic linkages and communications. Before that, Hindu and Muslims in different locales may have discovered their differences, but they may not have thought of themselves as homogeneous communities. Secondly, though Hindus and Muslims may not have lived in perfect amity, communal riots were not regular or frequent events. There were quarrels between, there were also Shia Sunni quarrels and caste conflicts. The reform movements among Hindu and Muslim helped them acquire a sense of communal identity. Hindu communalism was made possible thanks to reform movements. In the early part of this century, Dayanand Saraswati's Arya Samaj succeeded in combining the earlier social reforms issues opposite to child marriage, idolatry, polythemic widowhood, taboos, Brahminical domination, etc. With a pan Hindu consciousness, along with Shuddhi campaign, they gained deep roots among a variety of caste groups. But the 1890s, the Arya Samaj was beginning to criticize the Congress for not being Hindu enough and held conferences at Kumbh Melas and Sanatan Dharam Sabhas. Elsewhere, Ramakrishna Mission in Bengal, Pratna Samaj in Pune region, and Theosophical Society in Madras also promoted a sense of Hindu community through their revivalist practices. What about Muslim communalism? Among them too, reformist as well as revivalist trends arose. In UP, for instance, Sir Syed Ahmad Khan's hopes for reforms among the Muslims found a ready audience in traditional Muslim landowners and service families, or Aligarh elites, which found their influence declining. Initially, the British supported the reformists in order to counter the spread of strongly anti imperial pro caliphate Islam from the Deoband seminary. Subsequently, the British encouraged separatism by arguing that Bengal partition would mean more jobs for Muslims. Though Swadeshi did attract some Muslims, but British propaganda succeeded in driving the upper classes from the movement. At a political level, Sir Syed Ahmad Khan had opposed council entry and competitive exams for civil service on the general ground that they would only empower the Hindus who had an edge in English education. The Indian National Congress had not managed to attract many Muslims. The formation of the Muslim League in 1906 and the consensus of separate electorate ensured that separatist agenda were represented and argued out. In other words, separatism may be fostered by elite groups who mobilize people for their own interests. However, people are not always victims, they also act as agents. If they are being influenced by revivalist and separatist politics, there must be some objective reasons. In the UP and Punjab, communal riots became frequent from 1880s. Sumit Sarkar points out that socio-economic tensions may have played a part in triggering these riots. Hindu peasants faced Muslim talukdar and landlords in large parts of Awadh and Aligarh. Muslim artisans, shopkeepers, and petty traders faced big merchants and bankers in towns of UP, while Muslim peasants faced Hindu moneylenders in the Punjab. In Bengal, riots increasingly occurred in 1906 and 7 in different areas. The targets were Hindu zamindars and moneylenders, and the Muslim rioters were seen by nationalists as hired agents of British. And then in 1917, crowds of up to 50,000 Hindu attacked Muslims in 124 villages in Shahabad and Patna. Cow protection propaganda and Sanatan Dharam Sabha played a part in provoking such riots, but they were not sole causes. Considerably, rumor mongering and gossip about collapse of British rule as well as simmering peasant discontent may have found an outlet in such riots. But the people were not always only expressing economic discontent in a communal or religious grab, and they not always were Muslim drawn to pro imperialist and separatist politics. In Khilafat movement, Muslim leaders were Muhammad Ali issued first a call for non-cooperation in November 1919. Muslim leaders, conscious of the need for Hindu support to make non-cooperation a success, passed a Muslim League resolution calling stopping Palid slaughter of cows. Gandhi and the Congress, after the massacre at Jallianwala Bagh, joined hands with the Khilafat activists. Post Khilafat time saw the revival of separatist identity thanks to separate electorate and rising unemployment. Hindu communalism was also becoming restive and hostile. From 1924, the Muslim League would raise the demand for a federation with full provincial autonomy until the demand for Pakistan in 1940. The response of the Congress to the Hindu Mahasabha was always ambiguous. Despite his opposition to non-cooperation, Madan Mohan Malviya was courted by the Congress leaders. From the mid-20s, it had been active along with RSS in spreading Hindi, Shuddhi, and Hinduism. In some places like Banaras, the Swaraj Party and Hindu Mahasabha were the same organization. Maulana Abul Kalam Azad complained in 1937 that Congress members could not join the League, but they were not barred from being active in the Hindu Mahasabha. It was only in 1938 that Congress declared the Hindu Mahasabha membership being disqualification to remain in Congress. Through the mid 30s, the growth of both Hindu and Muslim communalism continued, and Nehru would admit to Prasad in 1939 that they had been unable to check anti Congress feeling among the Muslims. The Muslim mass contact campaign launched by Nehru was subverted by local Congress committees dominated by Mahasabhas anywhere. Further, the nationalist voices among Muslims such as Abul Kalam Azad battled against partition for long and their voices did not get recognized. He argued with both Nehru and Patel that partition would not solve the communal problem but make it more permanent. But somehow the mood of the dominant nationalists such as Patel was to accept partition and be done with it. We must also note that there were also other voices such as that of the Jami'iyat or Ulema Hind, which were averse to the idea of Pakistan and felt that partition would endanger the Muslims in India. But they were not an influential voice among the Muslims. Thus, by hindsight, one can see that the nationalist movement failed time and again to check communal developments within itself. Theoretically, this was because many nationalists often thought of Hindus and Muslims as monolithic communities or as raw materials for such communities. Historically, different historical factors somehow aided the development of a communal consciousness, and it may not be fruitful to figure out whether it all could have been avoided. What must be clear that is that religious identity and difference, one politicized, can take both benign and malevolent forms. A minimum agreement on liberal constitutional principles may be the best way of ensuring that such politicization of religion does not subvert rule of law or ensure in militant suppression of others. Such a minimal framework is provided by the Constitution, which provides for freedom of religion as a fundamental right alongside cultural and educational rights. Now we want to wind up this lecture. Thank you so much for your attention.